want it to go. So when I do my search, that pause, it's going back and sort of, it's doing its search, but it's going to build up this slowly. There's only one matching flight, because I guess it's, I think I did that Venice that I did was a pretty obscure one. Let me change that to Manchester or London. Let's change it to Gatwick or Heathrow. There's a few more available for that also. So Bangkok to Heathrow. Yeah, there's multiple ones coming up, and this is being updated all the time. The rest of the page is staying static, but that middle section is sort of, there's data coming in from all the different sites, all the different people offering flights, and that's what you see down the side. You'll get all these people who are offering flights, and they're the airlines. So the site, this kayak in this case, has gone off to all those flight providers, asked them what their results are for a particular sort of set of dates and locations, and it's then building up that page. But it's the web browser that's doing that. It's putting in a request to all these servers and got it back. The servers have just sent back their response, not as full pages, so you haven't got back from British Airways or Thai Airways that full sort of page. It's just sent back the immediate raw data concerning that particular flight, that date, those sort of locations to get it. Come back as some structured data, and the browser has assembled it. So that's the sort of basic idea that we're going around with this sort of Ajax. Is one, we're going to get our server to send back structured data rather than HTML for it, to offer it as a service to the client, and then in the client we've got to learn how to extract that data, because it's going to come back as either XML, JSON. It might come back as some sort of structured string data. And we've got to extract that data out and then build up that. And that is done using a language that the browser can run. So you need a good browser programming language. There's not much choice. It's JavaScript. And that's it. For it. You might say, oh well, can we do it in other languages? You can do it in Flash, ActionScript there. You could do it in Java applets. You could do it in like a scripting language. You're sort of one of the Microsoft one. I'm just trying to think of it offhand what the Microsoft version of JavaScript sort of was.
Is it Visual Basic?
Yeah, VB scripts you could be doing it in. Drawback to using those is, to be honest, nobody uses them now. They're not going to be the way of the future. I mean, certainly applets, you may have done them in your first year. So I think a few people may have done in the first year. Nobody uses applets in web pages anymore. They're sort of gone from it. Microsoft killed itself off in many ways by saying that their code only runs in Internet Explorer. And yes, if everybody used Internet Explorer, that'd be great. But unfortunately,
everyone does use it.
Everyone does use it.
Yeah, just to download Chrome.
Yeah. So if you're forced to use one, then yes, you might use their sort of version of it. So that's a bit of the sort of background to what we're doing. And we started off last week trying to sort of perhaps do this in some ways with some of the scripts that we're doing, but it's still generated HTML. So those sort of basics, I've just sort of covered effectively what's in the first sort of few slides from that, the motivation behind it. For why we sort of develop these web apps is that HTML is okay for standard documents, but it's not really a programming language. HTML is a display language. It's a markup language. It just sort of takes pictures, it sort of nicely lays them out. It's great for if you want to get that sort of overall design of it, but it's not so good for writing programs. You don't write programs in HTML. For that, you have to use some sort of programming language in the background of it, which is where you bring in scripts, which is where your JavaScript or your Microsoft sort of things come in for it. Also, HTTP isn't the best protocol for the way we use web apps, in that you don't always want to bring back the entire web page. You only want a small section of it to sort of come with it. The idea being, behind using a web app, rather than installing a specific application on your laptop or on your PC, all the PCs have got a web browser. You can't sort of get away without having a web browser for connecting to the net in some ways. So everybody's got a browser installed, and we're writing applications that run inside that web browser, but with their data typically being stored somewhere else. Because generally, if you're writing it as a standalone app, it may well be communicating with a server somewhere to get that data, but they have to still install that front end. This just means that you've already got the front end installed, and you've got a network connection sort of ready in there, and it's, your web browser's handling all that network connection. And because the content's coming from the server, you'll find that your data's never out of date, the software's never out of date, because both the software and the data that's with it comes from that sort of server side. Now there are alternatives, as I say. It solves some of the key problems of web apps. Using it in this sort of way of where the server generates the results, that's very coarse-grained. You're creating all your HTML over there and sending it back. And you're perhaps sort of, because it's synchronous, you put in a request from your browser to run something over on the server, you have to wait until that page assembles over at the server, it gets all its results, creates its HTML, and then sends it back to you. So you're waiting for that web page to load, for it sort of gets frozen. And you've got a bit of limited options for these sort of GUI elements. HTML5 has addressed that in some ways. They put some things in there. There's been other ways of doing it with Flash, with applets and things like that. It's still browser-based for it. So what's the best thing that you can do with what everybody already has in their browser? And as I say, some of the things have failed along the way. Java applets, they pushed it for years, but didn't really sort of catch on. It was just too clunky, a bit too sort of slow for it. Wasn't that good at interacting with HTML. Flash being killed off in many ways by Apple with their reluctance to support it, or refusal in some cases to support that. So if you're running on an iPhone or an iPad or a Mac, you have problems running on that. Other ones that are still around but having problems, Silverlight, that's the Microsoft version, if you like. Yes, runs in IE, but that's it. You can get plugins and things like that simulate it, but it's not a universal one. Java tried coming out with this Java FX, still just on the cusp of whether or not it's successful, but you may well come across that idea. What we've got with this traditional versus Ajax apps is, rather than going off and sending back the entire web page, we're getting responses of tiny bits of data that are built into the current page. You do an HTTP request, but not in the same way. The way with a standard one, you have this submit button, and the browser generates the request for you. It assembles that get instruction, the action, that's where you have that form. Everything's sort of form-based in that. Whereas with the Ajax and a web service idea, this is JavaScript-based. And you have your JavaScript deciding when to, how to assemble that request. One of the drawbacks is you have to do this. You have to assemble the request. Before, all the bits about when you click submit on a form and the browser generating it, it did all that for you. When you clicked on the form, it assembled all the form elements, created the URL, sent it off, waited for the results, and then assembled the results coming back. Very helpful for it. That's why browsers were sort of basically aimed at. Whereas now what we're going to have to do is decide ourselves when to actually request information. Like with that Google, we're doing it every time we press a key, and it goes off and gets something. And it'll come back, and you have to decide whereabouts on the page to put it, because it's not all the entire set to it. It's not the entire HTML. But it does mean you get a much faster response. Your page is a lot more responsive, a lot more sort of interactive to get it. So we get this idea of, as you type in things in Google, it's updating your search drop-down box for it. Still a lot of jobs in this sort of field. This is one of the, if ever you want to know whether or not you're doing the right thing in terms of learning a language or technology or whatever job sort of type you're going to, Indeed.com is a job site. And basically they've got a trends part to it. You go to Indeed.com, I think /trend or job trends, that's it. Go to Indeed.com/job trends. You can feed in any sort of keywords and it just brings back how many jobs mention that keyword or sort of phrase to it. So just putting in here, when was it? Something like September. I think it's, yeah, September, put these things in. Showing which of those languages were mentioned the most in jobs, I think. It's nothing to do with their relative, whether or not one's better than another one, that's another sort of argument. It's just sort of physically saying, well, how many jobs mention Java? How many jobs mention PHP in it?